Hello, it's Julie here. Did you watch my last video when I took you with me on my weekend trip to Fleuramour, the International Flower Festival? Hello there, I'm Julie from Julie Davis Flower Workshops and Flower Start, the online flower arranging classes. In this week's video, I thought you'd like to see some of the video footage I took of the actual flower festival and, like me, see whether you can use some of the techniques and colour combinations in your next flower arrangement. And don't forget to watch on to the end of the video. I bought a few things on my trip away and I'll show you what they were. As you'll know if you watched my last video, I took a coach trip over to Belgium to go to the flower festival, and we knew we'd arrived when we turned up and drove past the castle and were met by the letters spelling out Fleuramour. These were about, I would guess, 1.5 metres high, and when we had a close look they were flower heads that had been pinned onto a board, and I love the wavy nature of the flower placement, and if you look at it, it actually depicts the colours of the Belgian flag: black, yellow and red. To access the castle we parked up and then walked down the side of the castle and went in at the rear of the property, so we were met with a courtyard set up. Now I don't know whether you're a fan of Escape to the Chateau with Dick and Angel Strawbridge, but the castle, the chateau, had the same sort of look that theirs has. It's quite an ugly looking building compared to our more romantic castles here in the UK. A square footprint with a round turret at each corner and then outbuildings to each side, and there was a grassed courtyard in the middle. We weren't quite sure where to start, so we decided we'd make our way round clockwise. The first building we went into, I guess, was a former agricultural building, brick built with a tiled roof, and it was decked out like a theatre, so it was very low lighting. There were some installations in the building which were predominantly white and hanging down from the ceilings. Now, like loads of the flower arrangers there, I was really interested in the mechanics and how things were put together, and you can see the flowers, the orchids being displayed in glass test tubes hanging down from the main installation, and then those placements, which were on a plinth, had footed, almost like test tubes that you might remember from your science days at school. This was an interlocking blocks of white wood, twigs of wood held together with cable ties, and because of the overhead lighting it was casting some lovely shadows. From there we headed back out into the grassed courtyard, and we came across what I think was some of my favourite displays, a profusion of autumn. Now, if I wanted to put a name to this type of display, we would commonly call this an Italian mass, a grouped arrangement with everything heavily set into the container. So when we went, it was the end of September, the autumn season. It was packed full of decorative gourds and squashes, as if you'd been to the hedgerows and then collected all your foraged vines and then arranged them to maximum decorative effect. I think this stand here, the gentleman was actually selling the plinths, and this one was cut open, and you can see there's some chicken wire there which is holding in loads of chestnuts. This would be such a lovely arrangement to try at home. It reminds me a little bit of the nature tables that we had at primary school. Do you remember that? When you'd found something lovely at the weekend and you took in your feather or your piece of moss and you showed it to your teacher. Now the next arrangement or installation, really, it really was like going to an art gallery, was this huge display again in the courtyard. And what I particularly drew my attention to this was the little black boxes that the flowers had been arranged in. Now if I say to you cardboard document holder, do you look at this arrangement or this installation in a different way? And this is what it looks like to me. I think they were actually made out of wood, but this might be something that you could reproduce for a flower festival, probably something more large scale, that you could go through your office supplies, find all those document boxes, you know, the ones that come flat and you have to fold and pinch them together, sliding the slots into place so it holds. Spray paint that black and then mass your flowers into it, following the curve of the shaped part of the box. And that magnificent centrepiece with a pomander of roses and what looks like little sort of topiary hedge sections. And then I think it was pine cones, those really long pine cones, not the ones that we traditionally use here in the UK for our Christmas decorations. Again, they look more exotic, more European to me. In fact, this year I'm going to look out for those pine cones and just change things up a little bit. I think sometimes when you get used to using flowers and doing your own flowers at home, you can get stuck in a bit of a rut, and that's why it's such a good idea if you can get yourself to a flower festival or go to a flower club or look through magazines. It always gives you loads of different ideas, something to inspire you. You could copy it slavishly or just perhaps pick an element of the arrangement and use that as the kicking off point to make your arrangement your own. Another arrangement on the other side of the courtyard. Again, everyone was a showstopper. This was an arrangement sort of carved out to look as if it, for me, as if it was a huge leaf, some sort of sculpture, and you could have believed that this was metallic. And the leaves used here that have been pinned over the shape look to me like black cordyline leaves, and just the way they're folded, they're really, really fluid in shape, and then across the top edge packed with flowers. So again, when we arrange our flowers traditionally for our homes, we tend to do a cut and plonk and put our roses in a vase, so you've got lots of stems showing and then the flower heads all on a sort of equal level at the top. And it can look quite dated, and I think even though we love having flowers at home, sometimes you just got to forget about it. It becomes a chore, and this way I just think is so interesting. How about doing a cut and plonk, but cutting your flower heads really, really short? So instead of having them in a 30cm vase with the stems and the flowers above, how about having it in a much lower vase, just so the neck of your flowers are showing and you don't see any stems at all. So here we've got a variety of soft pinks and yellows, a fabulous colour combination. To me, I would have said they were spring-like colours, but with the dark leaves, it really does speak of an exotic autumn. Now this next installation almost has the curved shape of a vase with a section that's been cut out of it. And what attracted me here was the use of old man's beard or wild clematis. Those seed heads that go really, really fluffy. And again, it's something we find in our hedgerows absolutely everywhere this time of year. But it's been used, that humble plant, it's been used creatively and elevated into something that looks much more dramatic. What particularly drew me to this piece was the textured ripples around the sides of the main structure. So this has been made by folding leaves. So I don't know what the leaves were here. Possibly they might have been salal, but equally if you have an Elaeagnus plant at home, that's the leaf that's green and glossy on one side and then quite rough and much paler on the other. And what you do is fold your leaf in half along the vein and then pin it along that folded part, and then group your leaves together, overlapping them as if you imagine you're tiling a roof. So we've gone from the natural rounded shape of the leaves to another pinned arrangement, but this time the leaves have been cut into squares. But it just goes to show you don't have to use your natural plant material as it grew. If you've got a pair of scissors, you can change the shape of anything. You just need to be careful though, if you are cutting your materials into squares, for instance, that you use your leaves are quite robust. If the leaves are quite supple and soft, they may tear rather than cutting, and also you may end up with a sort of scorch line where the leaf starts to heal and repair itself. This piece did make me smile. Do you remember the video I posted last time round when we'd been to the wholesalers at Hasselt and saw what we thought was broccoli, and it turned out to be green spray painted or green dyed sedum, and here we've actually got broccoli which I think has been spray painted, or perhaps it is a purple variety of broccoli. If it is, it's certainly not one I'm familiar with. So when you're planning your next arrangement, don't forget to raid your fruit bowl and the vegetable box as well. And do you see that orchid poking through? And I love this, the little colour combinations, the purple broccoli, the little touch of purple orchid, and again just dusted through with that little bit of old man's beard, giving a softness to the edges and a nod to the season. And as we turn to the side of the piece, you can see another section has been taken out from the main form that this installation was carved from. But the gap has been bridged, and I think probably those are cornice twigs, the straight lengths of dogwood in the reddish tones, and just been pierced in from side to side, creating a sort of ladder effect, visually connecting both halves of the installation. And those beautiful orchids. This is a close-up view of the front of the castle, and I'll show you that rose-covered walkway in more detail. So there were two boards that have been made. The front-facing board had red roses, so when you approached the castle you saw all the red tones, and the second side of the board had white roses in it, so when you walked backwards or looked back from the castle into the grounds, you saw a white section, so you either saw totally red or totally white. So here we are close up on the bridge going into the main castle. I said you either got the red view or the white view of the panels. Of course, if you stood at the point of the panel and looked at them, you could see where the two sections of flowers met. And this was absolutely glorious to look at and made a really great photo opportunity. So the flowers were pasted in flower foam, really short stems, and as you can see, there's a mix of roses, there's dahlias, I think I can see chrysanthemums, hypericum berries, lisianthus, and I think the delicate pink flower in the middle is cucima, something like that, a more exotic tropical flower. So although you read this as being red, it's got all sorts of shades of pink, red and purple in it. And it's a contrast to the whites on the back side of the boards. So here we've got multi-petalled lilies. I can see lisianthus, a double lisianthus, so with the extra petals and fluffy petals around the edges. I think I can see some ivy berries and some statice, the sea lavender. It's just a real feast to look at, and a greenish lisianthus as well. This would make a really great screensaver on your phone. Moved into the castle itself, it was obviously an historic building, but there was nothing that I could see of the history of the building. It looked like it had all been recently renovated with top quality wallpaper, which was absolutely lovely. The next one was like a little woodland effect, and it was built in a circle, sort of two arms coming round, so you could actually walk into the centre of the design. There was a little low bench there and a flower crown sitting down, and you can just see this lady on the side having her picture taken with the flower crown on her head. And again, this is like an ombre of flowers, moving from really softly from the whites through to the deeper pinks, through the reds and oranges as well, with a little bit of changing height too. Sometimes I think we get a bit het up with our colour combinations, worrying about the relationship of the flowers on the colour wheel. But if you keep it simple, either stick with one flower colour you love, or try and take that colour from its whitest and purest form through the tone that you want, and then make it deeper through the other side, which adds lots of visual interest. Do you see here what I mean about the wallpaper? And this was a really stark, clipped, artistic installation. It would have sat as well in this castle as it would have done in a modern art gallery. So construction, it looked like it was a wire framework that had been wrapped, I want to say ribbon, but it seemed a bit tougher than that, perhaps even leather-like or a fabric. And it had been wrapped around and then twisted each time, which gives you that little bit of movement with the fold in the fabric and also the gaps through, and then decorated really, really simply with these white oriental lilies. And I think there are some pom-pom style gerberas there, and the lovely green hydrangea and the shiny, leathery cheese plant leaves. The next room we went into was a longer room, and it had been set up with 5 or 6 tables, and each table had an interpretation of a table setting, and they were just absolutely glorious to look at. And aside from the few at the end where you could imagine yourself actually sitting down and having a meal, they were in real fantasy realm. And although each of the tables was laid out with glassware, crockery and plates, you couldn't really have imagined yourself sitting down and enjoying a meal. But nevertheless, it was a real feast for the eyes. So here we've got some plates here stacked up with the dried corn or maize on them, and then the colours used. And notice the Gloriosa lily, the really exotic flower with the petals reflexed backwards in a really deep, sharp pink with little edges to the side. And I just love looking at the colour combination. It really was a bonanza of colour. So mixing the Gloriosa lilies with orchids and pinhead proteas, and then you've got the humble hedgerow crabapple next door to it as well. The whole structure here has been made on twigs, and some of them have been overwrapped with what I imagine is quite a chunky paper covered wire, just to add more textural interest. And if you look really closely, there's actually some artificial material in here as well. It looks like apple blossom, perhaps the blossom to go with those crab apples, pink petals with the gold plastic centres. So you'll have to let me know in the comments, do you like mixing your fresh and your fake flowers together? And on to the next table. The tablecloth was coils of these little red leaves, and then the contorted branches of, I'm not sure if it's hazel or willow over the top, and then the huge balls, the pomander balls of roses. I don't know whether you've ever made a pomander ball. They're seen often as being quite dated and used for weddings carried by little flower girls, but you can use exactly the same technique. Impale them on a stick and put that stick in a flower pot, and then you've got a topiary tree style arrangement. It's particularly popular at Christmas time. I was particularly interested as well to see the mix of flowers that were used, but sometimes I found it a bit jarring on the eye. What I would think as being traditional sort of country style flowers being mixed with more exotic varieties. Let me know in the comments whether it sits well with you too. Would you put those hanging gingers and orchids with much more dainty flowers? That this next installation is made again from a cage, a structure of what looks like contorted willow with vines growing through, a sort of tangled mess of a bit of stylised jungle. It almost looks as well as if it's got an old-fashioned rope washing line being coiled and entwined through the branches. And here, these leaves, I think they've been cut out from packaging paper. So next time you get an online delivery, don't throw everything straight in your recycling bin. How about having a look at what's been included and see whether you can use any of those elements in your next flower arrangement. Just make sure you don't get it wet, otherwise you'll have a bit of a sodden mess on your side. Notice the wool wrap as well around the edges. That's either wool or a textured string. Looks like there's some sisal rope in there as well. So flower arranging isn't just about all the pretty stuff about the flowers, it's also about the engineering that goes in to make the structures and to really draw your eye in and to challenge yourself visually in terms of what you might be able to do creatively and what you enjoy and what you don't enjoy. And notice that same packing paper at the bottom. This time it looks like it's been fashioned into bags. I think it may well be holding the orchid plants. So perhaps if you're gifting orchids this Christmas, you might want to not put it inside a ceramic pot and perhaps present it in a nice wrapping of brown paper instead. As we move into this next room, the arrangement was a circular piece, probably about 3 metres in diameter, so you could walk all the way around it. And that was another interesting thing I found about this flower festival. So often when you go to competitions or festival work here in the UK, you have little bits of ticker tape around the outside and you're not allowed to get up close and personal. They're very worried about whether perhaps you're going to touch something or knock something. I found here, although there were lots of people visiting and people were getting really close, there didn't seem to be any damage taking place, and it was just a lovely immersive experience to get up really close, to really peer down into a top international designer's arrangement and try and work out how it had been put together. So this arrangement was all whites with a willow cage at the bottom that gave the structure to the arrangement, and centrally was a mass of these longiform lilies which were illuminated by a spotlight. I can see some variegated grasses in there, some ami, which is the Queen Anne's lace. As you go around the edge, you can see there's white roses and lilies. I think there might even be some freesia in there, and it's almost like you've got this nest in the middle of the white lilies, and then the caging reaches up and sort of encloses it, giving it a sort of a safe harbour really, as if it is an egg in a nest. And hanging from those branches at the top, there's little tassels as well. I'm not sure what they're made out of. It almost looks like samphire, I'm sure it's not, but some kind of greenery tied together at the top to make a natural tassel hanging down, and contrasting with all the white flowers, we've got the rose hips in that bright red. So from the pure whites, we move on to the next room, which is a little bit more colourful. So a little tree here. This was quite a low design. So with the bright oranges, another variety of the Gloriosa lily, and the branches of this tree, I think they've been wrapped in yarn and then dipped in wax. I noticed from my European flower arranging magazines that wax seems to be used quite a lot in European designs. I don't know whether that is for installation work or for magazine photo shoots only, or whether it's used more conventionally in florist shops and in people's homes. For me, living here in the UK, it just seems like too messy to do, although sometimes at Christmas time I might dip apples into melted candle wax, because it does keep them and gives them a lovely frosted look. Now we're going to move on next to my favourite, one of my favourite rooms. I've got lots of favourites, and this was in one of the circular rooms at the corner of the chateau. These woven structures are just so interesting, hanging down like pendant lights, and then next to them glass tubes that have been spray painted, the ombre colour theme coming in again, with the colours moving from the purples on one side through to the deeper pinks and reds. So from the soft romantic colours in this little turret room, we move on to something a little bit more exotic. These are cages, sort of partitions that are set up in the room, and when you look really closely you see it's chicken wire at the back. This is the square chicken wire, which again we always think about as being a European design feature. Here they have woven through sticks. I can see rectangles of what I'm assuming is either plastic or a flat cane, but keeping to that really bright exotic colour palette. So from the orchids and the gingers, there's some white nerines in there, there's pin-headed protea, some luscious leaves. So similar in style but different colourway is this next installation, and it's got moving parts. And then we went down into the vaults, and this was like a little woodland setting in the cellar at the castle. It looks really as if it's a silver birch forest, so as if trees had literally been cut down and then wedged floor to ceiling into this particular room. I like the way that the flowers seem to be hovering. They're not set at ground level. This little network of boxes has been positioned across the tree trunks, and down inside you can see the water source for the flowers. There is a myriad of test tubes that are pinned or strapped to the inside the boxes. So from the outside edge it looks almost like a flower box, but you can see the 4 slices of wood going across are giving plenty of space for the flowers, with the test tubes attached on the inside edge of the 2 outer edges of the box, and then on the 2 edges of the 2 central planks, giving you 2, 4, 6 lines along which the flowers are being positioned. So a lovely contrast with the white stems of the silver birch. We sort of speak to the stone sections of the plinths, and then the colourful combination of flowers which talk to the colour of the brickwork up above. There's always these little stories, these little interconnections with your flowers, which again is a good tool for you to use when you're arranging flowers for your home. It may be that you go for your favourite coloured flowers and arrange those, or perhaps you go for a colour choice of flowers that picks up on the colour of your curtains or the cushion that you've got on your sofa, and then that way everything looks more designed and more intentional. What drew my eye to this particular installation, again, it was on a structure with everything hanging down from the ceiling, but some of the quite ordinary flowers that we used. So the little tassels of yellow flower, they are actually the very common yellow chrysanthemum that you would find in your local supermarket. The string of balls that look like beads on the other side of the installation are, I think they're craspedia. I think probably what they've done there is to take one of the long craspedia stems, so it's a long stem with this little ball of yellow at the end, and then they probably cut the flower heads off, or the other craspedia, and then threaded them on to actually make this beaded section. And then down in deeper into the cellars, this sort of magical Nordic looking winter wonderland with the fluorescent lights. I don't know whether you have Christmas tree festivals near you. Once we've done with our flower festivals here in the UK, I don't know whether it's a modern trend or a new trend or just something I've not noticed before, but flower festivals seem to be becoming increasingly popular. So the local church will open up its doors, and instead of having a flower festival, it will have a Christmas tree festival. There was a lovely installation in the centre of the courtyard of the castle as well. I could never quite get a very good shot of it, but I walked around the bottom section, and again it was an ombre design, taking you through in a swirl around the courtyard garden, and you can see there, following the pattern of the cobbles, so those beautiful colours just changing from the pales through to the pinks, through to the darker pinks, and through to the oranges. It's just about being brave, really, and thinking, could you really do that at home? Well, why not? What you could do is choose your rainbow colour of flowers, keeping your tones quite soft, but perhaps have different vases. So you might start off with a vase of white lisianthus, move to a white rose with a green tinge, onto something that was yellow, pink, and just have those lined up across your mantelpiece in simple glass vases. As we move from the front courtyard in front of the castle over the little bridge into the demonstration courtyard and where the sales area were, there was these lovely boxes, almost like window boxes, that had been planted onto the balustrade either side of the bridge, and these were packed full of sunflowers, just such a happy smiling flower. And of course it wasn't just about the flowers. We managed to find the bookshop too. I have never seen so many flower arranging books in one place. My mind was just blown. I'd come out with the intention of perhaps getting some back copies of the Fleur Creative magazine. But in the end, I decided with the deal that they were running, I would perhaps enjoy a book more. So I set myself a budget and I just feasted my eyes on all the books. It was so hard to decide what to buy. In the end, I went for a Christmas book because I do love the Christmas period, and I thought I would use it as a coffee table book and bring it out year after year. So don't forget to watch on to the end of the video, because I'll give you a flick through the pages of the book and you can see whether I made the right choice or not. It's very un-British, isn't it? After all that flicking through books, stopping for a bite of lunch to eat, and going round the half of the castle by this time, we did stop in the central courtyard and just had a look at the demonstrations. So these weren't demonstrations like you would know from your own flower club if you belong to a flower club here in the UK. They were 4 or 5 designers, seemingly on a rota, who stood in the middle of this little marquee area, facing outwards, and it was just a very informal collection of people, either sitting on chairs or sitting on the low wall around the sort of the arena. But they weren't engaging with the audience. They weren't talking about what they were doing. You were just there. They were there to work. And you could just sit and watch for as long as you wanted to. So I was particularly drawn to this designer because I'd spotted this image on Instagram. I was intrigued by the toast that was being used. So it was a circular arrangement in a sort of wreath form on the tabletop, and then with what looks like these spikes coming out of 2 reels of string with toast sort of suspended up above. So it was rather amusing. It brought a smile to my eye, and just goes to show that you can use anything as a mechanic for your arrangements. Now, another favourite. We nearly missed this building. We went up into the attic, certainly the higher floor space on one of the outbuildings, and we were totally blown away. And it was only by accident that we found this room, because we'd noticed the lovely display outside the doors, and I think this was the Harry Potter themed room. Now I seem to be a little bit out of touch with the rest of the world, that I have never read a Harry Potter book, and I think possibly I may have seen one of the films, so I am by no means a fan. But I thought this was the most stunning arrangement. And to me, it didn't really say Harry Potter at all. It just looked like a fabulous, festive autumn arrangement. I got married in October, and it just reminds me of my wedding, of course, not on this scale at all. But it was just absolutely amazing. So it was set out for a banquet. I don't know how many people the table would have seated, perhaps 50 or so. And then these huge urns up at the side, really atmospheric lighting, sparkling glassware, and perhaps again you could do this at home. It doesn't have to be this big, but perhaps you're having a celebratory party. Perhaps don't put the food on the table, have the food on the side, and just go crazy with your placement of the candles and your own pumpkins. I mean, at different time of the year, those could be pineapples, they could be apples, and just adapt it for the changing seasons. Look at the way that the hydrangeas are providing a little nest for the elevated pumpkins. Everything's just tumbled very casually, but of course it must have taken hours and hours to put together. And a lot of the flowers are just put into little vases, so there's no over arranging going on. It's all about the styling here. It just looks absolutely glorious. And then up above are these hydrangea wreaths as well, suspended from the ceilings, and I guess they are and I guess perhaps those are the wizards' hats, perhaps. It really was a feast for the eyes, and keeping to those autumn colours, the oranges, but putting in those pinks as well. So I think perhaps I'm going to stop thinking of autumn as being the season of orange, and perhaps think of it as being orange with a little bit of pink and red mixed in too. I think I walked up one side of the table very slowly and then back down the other side. And just see how many flowers you can name, mixing the very traditional looking roses with those exotic gingers. I can see some euphorbia there, the little orange flowers that we tend to see at Christmas time, and then these huge urns packed full of foxtail lilies, I think they are, at the top, and then the side shoots with berries coming out at the outer edge. And again, something you could replicate. You wouldn't want yours to be 3 metres high, but you could do that on a small scale if you had an urn vase, and just shrink everything down and just be bold with your placements. Forget about the greenery, just put the flowers in, something for a little bit of height and something to drape and fall over the edge of your container. After the feast for the eyes there, we then went round the little indoor shopping area. And this is just such a treat, much the same as when I showed you around the garden centre at Hasselt on our way over to the Flower Festival. Everything just seems a little bit different with our European cousins, and it's just so lovely to see what they have available and to take a few things home. So don't forget, watch on to the end of the video. I didn't buy loads, but it's always interesting, isn't it, to see someone else's shopping haul. Now look at these angel wings. €6.90. Do you remember from the video I posted last time, we saw this on the stag's head fern, like the scaly bit that the fern was growing out of? I don't know whether it is the same, but certainly this sort of dried seed head plant material was used quite a lot, and you can imagine it being pinned much the same as those leaves I showed you right at the beginning of the video. And for me, although I might not want to buy these angel wings, perhaps with the honesty in my garden, when it's gone from that green penny stage and then dries out to come that silvery stage, and then you can just peel off the outer edges, you'll end up with these silvery white discs, and you could use those to pin onto your arrangements. And then look at this, right up on the top shelf, all these interesting shapes. So I can see the star, I can see a plinth, and then a sort of tall lollipop where you would sort of imagine a wreath being attached to that, so it would be displayed, you know, vertically rather than horizontally in a table, and then back into the central display area, watching this bouquet being made, a very linear bouquet, hand tied, and then the amount of material that was put in it was absolutely mesmerising, just adding and adding and adding. And there's the finished bouquet, always a true test of a well-balanced bouquet, if you can get it to stand up without it falling over. And that was the end of a fantastic day. And we only wish we could have been there, stayed there even longer. So as we left, we then went round the front of the building to see the spider's web installation we'd spotted from the coach window. And then we moved on to look at the outside the chapel. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to go inside the chapel to look at the displays there. So next time we go, we'll have to pace ourselves and spend less time on lunch and more time looking at the flowers. So it's goodbye to Fleuramour, but do stay on to the end of the video and I'll show you my haul. Congratulations to making it to the end of the video. So I just got a few things to share with you, and you might recognise them from this week's video and the one that I posted before. So the first thing I bought was from the garden centre at Hasselt, and this cost me €8.20, which is about equivalent of £8.20. Probably a little bit more than I would have paid had I seen this at home, but I was on my holidays. So it was a lovely little plain glass hobnailed compot, and it's going to be really great for putting one of my pin holders into the centre and doing a foam-free arrangement for any time of the year. Also at the garden centre, I bought this pack of 4 candle holders. They're all different heights. I went for the black. They had them white as well, but I thought I could always spray paint them if I didn't think the colour worked for me. So this is something you would place into an arrangement and then put a tea light in the top. What I thought I might do, as I'm trying to go foam free, was I thought I might get a plinth of wood, and I have previously picked up old chopping boards from the charity shop, and I might drill holes in that and then place the candles in the holes and then do an arrangement that was more about the candlelight than about the flowers, so I could, with my Christmas evergreens, just trail them around at the bottom for a real minimal look, but hopefully sophisticated and European. And then I bought myself a Christmas star. It's got to be the law, hasn't it, that everywhere you go, you've got to pick up a new Christmas bauble for your tree. So this is a little hanging star, a sort of Scandi vibe, which goes with the look I've been doing for the last few years. And this was €2.60. And then at the Flower Festival itself, I bought this stand. And I am overjoyed with this, apart from the fact I put it in my bag and it got slightly squashed on the way home. I was stretching out my feet on the coach and met some resistance and didn't realise or remember that I had my bag of goodies at my feet. So this was €8.70. I'm imagining this with a Christmas door wreath on top. So do you remember in the video I said that there was this sort of lollipop frame where you could put your wreath so it stood vertically? I'm thinking horizontally here, so making a door wreath in the traditional way, but instead of putting it on my door, enjoying it in the centre of my table as a tabletop decoration. And as we know, anything that's elevated always looks really special because you're adding in not only the size of your arrangement itself, but including the space underneath. So I'm quite pleased with that. And I did manage to straighten it out. I bought a book, and I will flick through the pages, and I'll do that right at the end of the video so you can have a look. This is absolutely gorgeous. It's written in German with an English translation alongside, but really what I'm doing is forensically examining every single one of the photographs. And the last thing I bought was a foreign flower arranging magazine. We got caught at the terminal for the shuttle. There were some delays going on, so we went inside the terminal building. There was a WH Smith's, and I went straight to the flower arranging magazines to see what I can find. And the price, it was a whopping £7.90, which is way more than I would normally pay for a flower arranging magazine. But it's quite interesting to flick through and see what other people are doing in other parts of the world with their flower arranging. I do hope you enjoyed my commentary on the Flower Festival at Fleuramour, and if you've ever got an opportunity to go, I highly recommend it. And if you haven't already seen the video of my weekend away, when I tell you more about my journey down and the journey back from the Flower Festival, do make sure you take a look at it. I'll leave a link to it in the notes underneath this video. That's all from me for now, and I'll see you again next time.